now roll into what is known as unified functional testing. And as we're going to see, this actually becomes one individual application as opposed to two separate installs. So really, what is unified functional testing? So as we saw before, we started out with Quick Test Professional. And we also have service tests. So we have applications for testing GUI applications. So, our standard Windows desktop applications, whether that's an SAP application or a web app. And then we have service tests, which is for testing web services, whether they're JMS queues, SOAP web services, REST web services. And both of these products roll into UFT. So the naming conventions for these have changed a little bit in the new unified functional testing. So instead of calling this Quick Test Professional, we're now calling this GUI testing. So that's really all it is just testing the graphical user interface for these applications. The same goes for service testing. Instead of calling this tool service test, we're now calling it API testing. So the GUI testing plus the API testing now makes up the unified functional testing suite of products. So let's talk about the upgrade procedure. Now this is a little bit complicated, so I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with this. So if you purchase Quick Test Professional standalone, you can upgrade to the new 11.5 version. So you're going to get a unified functional testing 11.5, but it's only going to give you access to the GUI component of the testing only. So you can create GUI tests, but you will not be able to create the API tests. Likewise, if you bought service tests standalone, you can upgrade to the new 11.5 version, but you're only going to be able to create the API tests from unified functional testing. So you can still have your individual products, but you're only going to get the piece that you previously had. Now, if you had purchased unified functional testing as a package, so if you purchased unified functional testing 11 and you upgrade to 11.5, you're going to get the full suite. So you're going to get the GUI and the API tests available to you. Now, if you purchase new licensing for any of these products, you're going to be buying unified functional testing. So you're going to buy the UFT license. It is still possible to buy standalone service test licensing, in which case you can only get what's known as the unified functional testing API tests. So just to be clear, you can upgrade, but you're only going to get what you previously had. Now, from any of these products, let's say that you had Quick Test Professional and you want to actually upgrade to the full UFT, there is an upgrade path available to you. So you can get to the full UFT from wherever you're currently at, but you can also get the advantage of some of the new features of UFT 11.5 application by just upgrading the software and not upgrading the license. So what we get from the new UFT 11.5 is really a modern development experience for test development. So what we have now is a single GUI for both developing GUI tests and API tests. So it's basically just one application, and everything gets managed from that application. It also shares the same look and feel as what we have for LoadRunner 11.5, the virtual user generator. So we've got one central IDE that all these tools are using. And the advantage there is that if you're familiar with one of them, it's going to make the learning curve to picking up the new tool very, very small. With this new modern IDE, we've got a number of different enhancements that make it a lot easier to work. We finally have true IntelliSense support. So while HP has said there's been IntelliSense support for a number of years, the IntelliSense support was always a little bit weak. So if you had objects that you had built by hand, whether they're VB objects or objects in your application, you weren't really able to access the methods and properties of those very easily through the IntelliSense. So they've improved that a great deal. One of the great things they also put in here is the ability to edit multiple tests. So this has always been kind of a huge issue for people who are using Quick Test Professional in the past. We can only have one test open at a time. So with the new UFT 11.5, you can have a number of different tests open. And these tests can both be GUI tests or API tests. So it's really easy to kind of pop in from one test to another and make modifications. We can also manage the test flow visually. So we have a new visual test design that we can manage where our data comes from and our iterations. It makes it a little bit easier. Previously, all of that was kind of hidden through menus, and it was all kind of textual based. This is a very much a graphic interface for that. It doesn't change the way that functions. You can still do iterations. You can still move your data from action to action. But it makes it so it's very visual and easy to understand. We also, with the addition of ALM 11.5, we get the ability to schedule and execute tests remotely on remote testing machines. So this is part of the lab management module within ALM 11.5. So really what this does is allows us to allocate a UFT machine to run a test on at a certain point in time. So we can say at midnight, go run this test on all of our applications. And you don't have to be sitting there watching it. And this is actually a big advancement from where we were at previously with test execution and test scheduling. And if you want to know more about that, I actually wrote a blog about this on Checkpoint's website about 2 months ago about how you can leverage this remote execution using unified functional testing. One of the things that HP has also added that's very exciting to Unified Functional Testing 11.5 is mobile application testing. So the big thing now that everyone is doing is mobile applications. Everyone wants to be able to test these mobile apps because they're very much becoming part of your application suite. So we see this with almost any company that does business with the public. So you have things like airline apps that people are checking in online, buying tickets online. Anything you can think of that you'd be doing, you could do on a mobile app. And these mobile apps need to be tested the same way that any other application would be. It's one of the biggest things we see with mobile applications. As soon as they don't work, people just forget about them. So if you need to make sure the mobile application quality is up there with your desktop application quality. So HP, recognizing this, has built in mobile application testing into UFT 11.5. So it's going to support the testing of native mobile applications. So these are applications that are actually installed on your mobole apps or your mobile devices. So these are things like iPads, iPhones, any of your Android devices, BlackBerry devices. So really any sort of mobile device that you can install software onto, we're going to be able to test with UFT 11.5. And we do that by leveraging Perfecto Mobile. So Perfecto Mobile is an organization that's partnered with HP to integrate with UFT and basically provide these real devices that we can run these tests on. So when we're running the test using UFT, we're running on real devices. We're not emulating it. So we're getting the real performance of the device. We're seeing real defects that might come from various builds of those devices. And that's really the key, is that we're using real devices here. There's two options for this. We can either use a cloud-based system or an on-premise. So in the cloud-based, you're basically leveraging a device cloud that Perfecto Mobile has set up. So they have thousands of different devices that you can leverage and you can run tests on. And the idea is that you want to be able to write the test once and run it on many devices. So let's say that I want to run, I've created a test to test my iPhone app. And I'll be able to run that on iOS 4. So I might have an iPhone 4. I might have an iPhone 5 that has iOS 5 or 6. We've got the ability to write one test and use it many different times. Now, on the on-premise solution, you can actually have these devices stored in your own data center. So you can buy your own devices and have them hooked up to your own network. So if you have a device that might be for internal use only or for an application that's internal use only, you can use these on-premise solutions to deploy those devices and leverage the UFT mobile testing with them. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the enhancements that we have in general to UFT 11.5. So we get a number of GUI environments that we've added into this. So we finally have support for Flex-based apps, and we also have Qt support, which is another development environment people are using. So on the Flex-based side, this is really meaning Flash application testing. So not all Flash apps are based on Flex, though. Flex is the background technology that can make applications stream from the server. So if you're building applications with Flex, you're now able to embed this technology into it and then test your applications with UFT 11.5. So that's a really useful feature in the new version. They've also refreshed the support for all of the existing add-ins. So things like Java, SAP, the web. Anytime that there's new browsers, anytime there's new versions of Java, there's new SAP clients, HP goes in and updates those. And all of the previous support that's been out there through patches for version 11 of Quick Test Professional, and including additional ones that haven't been released as patches, those are all included in the new 11.5 build. Another thing that's very exciting is they've improved the 64-bit application support by a great deal. So now we're able to do better testing of 64-bit applications. We're seeing these become more and more prevalent in the wild.
Hey, Patrick.
Yes.
I'd like to interrupt for just a moment. We have a few great questions. And by the way, I did want to mention to everybody, you know, I think I mentioned at the beginning we have 250 folks registered, which is fantastic. So I'm not able to respond to the raised hands icon in GoToWebinar, but we are reviewing questions. We're going to take questions as we go. Any questions that we don't respond to during the webinar, because we do want to remain true to 1 hour, then we're actually going to answer those questions and email those out as well as post them on our website. So Patrick, I'm just going to throw a couple of questions out at you. I had a few questions in regard to service test. Now, the service test solution is different than the service test add-on in Quick Test Pro, correct?
Yes, so that's a good topic. So previously there was a SOA add-in to Quick Test Professional, and if anyone used this add-in probably could agree that it wasn't very useful. You could get through a web service test with it, but it wasn't very user-friendly. So HP actually recommended that anyone who was doing real web service testing use service test as an alternative. In the new UFT 11.5, that SOA add-in for Quick Test Professional has actually been sort of decommissioned or deprecated. It's no longer available. So I don't think there was that many people using it in the first place, but the better option is definitely service test, or now with 11.5, the API testing using UFT.
Fantastic. All right, and then another question for you. UFT 11.5, that does not require a connection to ALM 11.5, correct?
That is correct.
They can use just UFT without having ALM.
Yeah. You can use it standalone. There are definitely a lot of additional features that you get by connecting it to ALM 11.5 or Quality Center 11.5, but you still can use it standalone, just like every previous version of Quick Test and Service Test.
Great, great. All right, thank you, Patrick. And I do want to mention to everybody, we are taking what we call the ooh-ah survey today. So if Patrick says something or shows you something when he gets to the demo that really impresses you, feel free to type in your question block, ooh-ah, and we'll know you were impressed. All right, Patrick, go ahead, take it away. That's my bad joke for the day.
All right, so one of the most exciting features that we have in UFT 11.5 on the GUI side is this new HP Insight technology. What this is going to allow us to do is to interact with objects on the screen visually. So we've all been there with Quick Test where we have an object that for whatever reason we can't identify positively all the time. Maybe it just doesn't have the properties, or maybe it's an environment that's not necessarily supported within Quick Test. So maybe it's a Flash application that's not tied to Flex, and we're trying to interact with it, but we're not necessarily able to because Quick Test can't see those objects. So the Insight technology is going to help us solve that problem. So it identifies the objects the same way that we do, just visually. So we're looking at it, we're looking at, okay, here's a button. We know what that button looks like, we click on it. Quick Test, or UFT does the exact same thing, where it's looking for a particular pattern, bitmap pattern, and then it interacts with that bitmap. So we've got a full range of action support, and this is really mouse-based support. So we're clicking, we can do drag and drops. There's a couple other actions we can do on that as well. Now the one thing that is not going to do for us is pull data out. So if we wanted to do something like a checkpoint, or we wanted to verify the value that comes out of an application that's not necessarily supported, then we wouldn't be able to do that. But the nice thing is this supports a range of applications that we can automate. It's really just everything that we can run. So we can even do non-Windows-based apps. So maybe you have a Citrix application or you have a Linux-based application that you're streaming to a Windows desktop. We can interact with that. Now, the key here is the HP Insight, this Insight technology, is really just sort of a way of identifying objects that we wouldn't be able to identify otherwise. So we still want to try to use the native object identification because that's going to work better most of the time. But if there's objects that, for whatever reason, can't be identified using the native technologies, this is where HP Insight comes in. So this is really kind of that last-ditch effort to make sure we can automate. And it really is a good one because it covers basically everything that we wouldn't be able to touch otherwise. Now, the nice thing here, too, is that it's flexible. So when we create tests using HP Insight, we can mix and match traditional object recognition within our tests. So we don't have to just say this entire test or this entire action is going to be based on Insight. We can just say this particular object interaction is going to be, but everything else is going to be using the traditional native interaction with our objects. So we get a lot of flexible usage from this, and we're going to see this a little bit later in the demo. So a couple other GUI test enhancements to talk about. We can now convert HP Sprinter exploratory tests into UFT tests. So HP Sprinter is an add-on to HP ALM or HP Quality Center that allows us to do some manual testing in a better way. This now can convert those tests we create using HP Sprinter into UFT tests, so that can be a big time savings. One of the nice things they've also added, I think it's a big win for a lot of organizations, is the file content checkpoints. So if you have an application that generates a PDF doc or an MS Word doc, and you need to verify the content in those documents, you can now create a checkpoint that will do that for us. So previously we weren't able to really do that. There were some kind of workaround ways we had to create to verify text that was coming out of documents we created. Now we can use the checkpoint in here and check those file contents natively within UFT. One of the new technologies that it also supports is the Microsoft Active Assembly. Now this is kind of a big word for basically the ribbon technology that's in a lot of the new Microsoft-based applications. So this would include things like Microsoft Office, where you have that ribbon and you have all the different icons on it. What we're seeing now is a lot of new applications are being developed with that ribbon technology. So now we're able to interact natively with those buttons, where previously it was basically just seeing the entire thing as one big object. So this is actually kind of a big thing for organizations that are using ribbon-based applications. On the API testing side, they've added support for SAP iDocs and RFCs. So now we can do API testing of some of the SAP technologies natively from the API portion of UFT. They've also added full JSON support. So JSON is the JavaScript object notation. It's a common protocol used to move JavaScript code back and forth between web apps. So this is typically on a browser-based application. If we're going to be testing JSON strings that come back and forth, we can now do that natively through UFT API testing. One of the biggest things I think that's going to be very useful is now we can import SOAP UI tests and convert them to UFT API tests. So SOAP UI is one of the leading web service testing applications that's out there. It's probably the biggest competitor to UFT. Now, if you have SOAP UI tests and you're thinking about starting to use UFT API tests to mix them with your GUI tests, there's now an easy way to get there. So you can import those tests and convert them right into API tests. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. It's a nice conversion process. Another big win is we now have support for reusable actions. So we can create actions the same way we can in the previous versions of Quick Test and now in UFT GUI testing. We can create those actions and reuse them within the same test or within a different test. So a very similar concept where we kind of use it, write it once and use it many times. So with that, I want to follow up the demonstration.
Can you pause for just 1 second, Nancy? Let me throw out a couple of questions at you real quick. I know we're on a time restraint here. A lot of questions are being asked in regard to the ability to execute Quick Test Pro 10, Quick Test Pro 11 scripts in UFT 11.5 and what needs to be done in that regard.
Okay. So all scripts that were written in previous versions of Quick Test would be able to be run using UFT 11.5. They will need to be opened up and resaved. Typically there is kind of an upgrade process, but you basically just open it up. And once you resave it, it's going to make sure that all the libraries are there and just save it for you. We have to get back to you, because I don't remember offhand how far back you can go without having to do an interim upgrade. I think you could probably go back through the version 9, which is going to cover almost everybody, I think. So you should be able to open those tests up and then execute them.
Great, great. And a couple of other questions are in regard to the, excuse me, the browsers and the environments that are supported, especially as it pertains to you know, touch screens, touch pads, and whatnot?
Okay, so on the Windows-based side, we have Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Chrome, and we could definitely provide you with the full list because there's a full list of all the individual versions that it supports. On the mobile device side, that's going to really depend on the mobile device itself. So Perfecto Mobile is actually going to be interacting with the devices themselves. So if you have let's say that you are going to be testing a mobile version of your website on an iPad, then you want to use both Safari and you want to use, say, Chrome on an iPad. Because you're actually interfacing with the device itself, and so the way that this technology works, you're going to be able to use any browser that's supported on the device. So we kind of take away the software layer, and we're interfacing directly with the device itself through some very neat technology from Perfecto Mobile. So the short answer there is that any software that runs on those devices, we can interface with.
Fantastic. All right, and then what about you know, different touch type motions on the screen, like, you know, the swipe and the flick and whatnot?
Yeah, those should all be supported. Now, individually, we probably have to dig into each device type, but they should all be supported the same way that you know, any other action would be, because what we're doing is that the way the Perfecto Mobile tools work is they actually sort of emulate a person's finger. So it really can emulate those swipes and the flicks and, you know, kind of the double pinch, you know, the multi-touch. So all those things are reproducible through the Perfecto Mobile UFT 11.5 mobile application.
Fantastic. All right, Patrick, go ahead and move forward with the demo. Thanks for answering those questions.
No problem. All right, guys, so what I want to show you now is UFT 11.5 in action. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so this is the new UFT 11.5 interface. You notice it's going to be a lot different than what you probably have seen in the quick test or service test. Now, this is actually almost identical to what we see in the load runner view gen interface. We have a common menu, so we've got the same menus regardless of where we're really at. And they've rearranged things a little bit, and it makes a lot of sense. It takes a little while to get used to it, but it makes it a lot easier once you kind of figure out where you're at. And again, the key here is that it's one IDE, and regardless if you're doing GUI testing, API testing, or even if you're doing load runner script creation, it's going to be very common, very familiar to you once you get used to this. So that's kind of what HP was going for, is instead of creating 3 different IDEs, they want to have one single IDE that all the tools would leverage. One of the things we also get is we get the idea of a solution. So if you're familiar with the idea of a solution set in, say, Visual Studio, it's a number of different tests or different files put together. So you can create a solution within UFT and load the entire solution at once, which is basically a collection of multiple tests. So I'm going to open up a test that I've already created. And we're going to start to see some of this visual design. So these are my actions that I have in my test. So I start my test, I've got to create order action, modify order, and verify order. So these are all the actions that are being called in my test. This is very similar to that test flow pane, but it makes a little bit more sense because it's all visual as opposed to just kind of a hierarchy in my test flow. We notice on my left-hand side, we've got all of my actions the same way I had before, and I can also look at any external tests that I might be calling from this. So I've got all my actions listed here, and I can create new actions. So if I want to make a new test, when I'm making a new test, I can either pick it to be a GUI test or an API test. So when we're creating the test is actually defined whether it's GUI or API based. So in this test, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be logging into HP's demo flight application, booking a flight, and then I'm going to be using a web service to go in and modify that flight. And then I'm going to verify it using the GUI. So what I'm going to be doing is mixing and matching both GUI components and API components together into a single test. So just to show you guys what this looks like, I'm going to open up this flight GUI. I'll log into it and to show you what the flow looks like. So basically, I'm going to pick a date that I want to fly. I'll pick my fly from, fly to, so where I want to go to. I'll pick my flight, put in a name, pick my booking class, and then I insert the order. Pretty basic, but this is going to demonstrate that functionality. So now once I insert the order, I'm able to use a web service to go and modify properties of this order. So what I'm actually doing in this web service is I'm going to be modifying both the name and the booking class for this ticket. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to show you around this test a little bit, and then we're going to execute it. So I've got my create order. So if I double-click this, it's actually going to take me into the code. Now, previously, this was known as the expert view within Quick Test Professional. This is really just now known as the editor, and this is really the default view for any of our GUI-based tests. We can still revert back to the keyword view. It's just hidden in one of the menus here. So if I go to the keyword view, I can get the keyword view of any of my actions the same way I could within Quick Test Professional. But we do find that more of the power users are using the expert view, or not the editor view, than the keyword view. So this is all pretty much the same. Now, one of the nice things you can do with the new editor is we have what's known as code folding. So let's say that this entire block of code was part of a function. Let me just move this down here real quick. So now I can fold this whole code block. So as we get more complicated functions and function libraries, we're able to start folding them. We've got a nice menu here. We can pick any of our different objects or any of our different code pieces out and get to them directly. So it makes it sort of, this is the same functionality you would have in a modern IDE. So if you're familiar with any of the development environments, Eclipse, Visual Studio, this is basically the same thing. They just added all those niceties that have been out there for years for other applications into this. So it's really driven around development as opposed to just point and click. So if I go back to my create and verify order, once I go in and create my order, I want to be modifying it. Now, what I'm going to show you here is that there's actually an update order tab or an update order step in here. This is actually a call to a API-based test. And if I open this up, it's going to be opening up this API test. And this is going to load what is basically the same thing as what Service Test 11 was. So it's almost the same interface where we have a start, we see our web service call, and we see our parameters we're putting into it. So this is basically the same exact GUI that we had with Service Test 11.2. We also see we have our activities pane. So we have those same sort of functional setup in the application as we had previously. The key here is that it's all just housed in one big application. And you notice I've got my create and verify order test open. I've got the test level. I've also got an action open. So if I go in here and open up my verify order action, I can have that action open as well. So I can have basically just a whole slew of actions open and different tests open within the same interface. And this is really the big advantage to UFT 11.5 over what we had previously with, say, Quick Test 11, where you could only have one test open at a time. So once I go in and update my order, I'm then going to go and just verify it. So I'm going to run a couple checkpoints on this just to make sure that things that I changed using that web service are actually being changed in the GUI as well. So if I go back into my create order, I'm going to show you the data that I'm going to be using for this. So I'm going to be inserting John Smith is the name. So I'm going to be also booking a economy class ticket. So the economy is the default one. I'm going to be changing that to first class. And I'm going to be changing the spelling of John Smith to Jon Smith. So those are the two changes we're making with our web service call. And I'm going to execute this test now. And we're going to see how successful that web service call was. So when I run this test, I pick the test I want to run. And again, because we have potentially multiple tests open, we have to pick which one we're going to be running now. So I'm going to pick this create and verify order, and I'm going to run this test. So we see it's logging into my application, booking my flight, and now it's going to be calling the API-based test. So in the background, it's calling this web service. and then it just opened up my test for me, or actually, excuse me, opened up my order that I just modified, and then it's verifying on the screen, and then it closed it out. So once we get through this, we get our run results viewer, and we have one consolidated run result for our entire test. So if I drill into this, I see that it failed. So I see that it created the order. I went in and modified the order, so I can dig into my web service call. So I'm going to know that this actually happened successfully. So it made my web service call. I'm going to see the request and the response. So this is very much the same as what we had in service test. And then I'm going to go into my verify order. So I'll drill into this and find out exactly which failed. So right here I have a checkpoint on the traveler name. So I changed it to John J.O.N. Smith. That worked. Now, if I go into my ticket class, I'm going to see that it didn't actually change it from economy to first. So now I know I have an issue with my web service where if I'm updating the web service or updating the order through the web service, it's not actually updating it in the GUI. So this is an example of pulling both a GUI-based test and an API test together into one end-to-end process and running that through. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. This is really the meat of what UFT allows you to do, is combine both GUI tests and API tests into end-to-end flows. Now, what you can also do beyond that, if you use ALM and you're using the business process testing module of ALM, you can create API-based components and you can create GUI-based components, and you can mix them into one end-to-end business process test. So you're able to create these components and use them together and share data amongst them. So that's really the power of having a single consolidated application. And this is really what sets HP UFT apart from any other application out there that does functional testing for us, is that it's one application and you can share the data between them. The next thing I want to show you guys, and this is actually the last part of our demo, is I want to show you the new Insight technology. So I'm going to open up a different solution that I have here. So open up this solution. Let me close my solution real quick. Let me actually just restart my entire application real quick. One second, let me
Patrick, might this be a...
Yeah, if you have
might
questions.
we have a second while you're doing that? Yeah, a couple of questions here. So in a situation where you were to open up and upgrade a Quick Test Pro 11 script in UFT 11.5, are you then able to still execute that script in Quick Test Pro 11? Or as they put it, has that ship sailed once you've opened it up and upgraded in 11.5?
I would have to check on that. My gut instinct is that once you upgrade, you're probably not able to go backwards, but we'd have to verify that for you. In most cases, once you upgrade it, you're kind of stuck with the new version now.
Sure, sure. All right, great. And you know, as I mentioned, everybody, we are going to be offering a copy of all of the questions asked with answers. Another quick question, Patrick. VBScript, is that still the sole scripting language available?
So on the GUI side, VBScript is still the language. On the API testing side, that uses C#. So we're still kind of mixing the two languages, but VBScript is still the main language that's there. So until further notice, VBScript is kind of here to stay.
Excellent. All right, great. And do you want to get going with the demo, or you want another question? We have a ton of them.
A question that's pertinent. I can do the demo now, or we can ask another question. It's up to you.
Sure. Well, let me ask one more quick question then. And you may have answered this before, will UFT 11.5 be compatible with Win 8?
It will be. It's not certified yet. But it should be on the radar. I don't know the exact time. Typically, the applications are certified about 6 months after it's released to the public. So I would expect that sometime in mid to early spring, UFT 11.5 will be certified on Windows 8. Don't hold me to that because it's it's always kind of subject to HP's R&D timetables, but it will be at some point soon.
All right, great.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is the Insight technology. So this is the visual technology that recognizes objects for us. So I'm going to open up a little Flash-based calculator. So here's an application. This is all Adobe Flash. So I can do like 1 times 6. And I can do calculations on this. So it's just a really simple application that just emulates, say, the Windows calculator. So this is a standalone Flash app. This isn't tied back to the Flex platform. So we're not able to connect to this through UFT. So even though it is Flash, it's not based on Flex. So when I actually open this up and I take a look at the Object Spy, if I'm looking at this and I've got my web add-in enabled, one second. So I'm going to spy on this, and we're going to see that we can see the different elements in our page. So we can look at the title here, we can look at this link. But if we go and look at this whole block right here, it's just going to show up as a web element. And if we notice, it's actually because it's the object tag within HTML. And this is really that Flash object. So we're not able to interact with this Flash object through the web add-in or really any other add-in that we have because, again, it's not tied back to Flex, so we couldn't use the Flex add-in. So if I want to be able to automate against this application, I need another way of doing it. So in some cases, people previously used the virtual objects in QuickTest Professional, which were kind of clunky, and they were really based on kind of screen coordinates to some degree. People also used the low-level recording and the analog recording to click on certain screen coordinates. That was really based on the application always being in the same location on the screen, and it was based on the fact that anything you were interacting with wasn't going to move within the screen. So if you moved a button even a couple pixels, it could make your automation break. And then you had to re-record everything from scratch. So those are really kind of the absolute last resort for interacting with your application. What this Insight technology does is it allows us to add objects into our object repository and deal with them the same way we would any other object. So we'll identify the object, and then we can click it, we can pull properties from it. So really, it's kind of the best of both worlds for us. So let me go in and show you how we add one of these Insight objects into our object repository. So I'm going to open up my repository, and I'm going to go and add a new Insight object to the local repository. So I can do it two ways. I can do it using an automatic way where I can just interact with the application, and then it's going to come back and say, here are the objects that you interacted with. Let's try to kind of get it a little bit closer to what we need to identify. We can use a manual one. I use the automatic one first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to interact with the multiplication sign. So as soon as I do that, it's going to say, okay, highlight on my application exactly where is this, where are the boundaries to this. So if you notice, I'm kind of moving this very similar to like a cropping tool. So I'm going to just focus it on this multiplication sign. Okay. Now that I have it, I can click Save. And I'm going to change the name of this just to the asterisk. Okay. I'm going to go in, add another object. So I'm going to use the equal sign. And sometimes it picks it up pretty quickly. So like you notice this one picked up automatically the boundaries. So your mileage may vary just depending on exactly what the visual is you're looking at. And I'm going to put it as an equal sign. And I'm going to do one more. Pick another number. We'll do 8. And sometimes we got to move these a little bit. There's a little bit of manual work involved here. Okay. Save this one, and I'll call this one 8. Okay. So now I've got these different objects. I'm going to move this one up into there. So I've got these different objects in my repository, and now I can use them the same way I would any other objects in my repository. So if I go into my calculator, I'm going to add, let me just remove this step real quick. I'm going to do a quick calculation. So I'm going to do 4. So I'm clicking on 4, and you notice it puts the image in there so we can kind of keep track of what we've got. So I'm going to click on 4, and then I'm going to do multiplications times 8. Now, we also have the ability to do we can just type this in manually if we'd like. So we can pick our objects by name. So we get kind of the best of both worlds. We get a visual of it, and we can just type it in manually if we'd like to. So let me close this. I'm going to go back into my application, make sure it's ready to go. And then I'm going to execute this. So we notice, we go back into our application, and it did my calculation for me. So it was clicking on each one of those different objects. And the nice thing is that even if these objects were to move, so even if we just decided to move the numbers around in this application, it would still interact with them the same way, because it's not looking at it on a discrete coordinate basis. It's looking for the actual bitmap of it. Now, we can also use the ordinal identifiers and the visual relation identifiers to identify these objects. So let's say that I had a number of different objects in my application that were all basically the same. I could use the ordinal identifiers, so basically the order in the application, to pick which one I wanted to interact with. So we do get some of the the traditional object properties with our inside objects, but we don't get all of them. So we can set the visual relation identifier here. We can also set the ordinal identifier. But because we're using inside objects, we're not able to go in and say, I want to pick the value from that, or I want to pick which text color it is, things like that. Those are all still kind of hidden from us because it's just interacting with the object itself. But overall, what the technology is going to allow us to do is support environments that we weren't previously able to support. So whether that's a new browser that comes out, or maybe it's an application you've kind of grown from scratch, anything that you can come up with, you're able to interact with. As long as you can display it on your screen, you're going to be able to interact with it using the Insight technology within UFT. So with that, I'd like to wrap up the demo portion. So Bob, let's open it up for questions.
Fantastic. All right, one of the questions is, and I'm going to go backwards just a little bit, question is asked, if you have a long page, will Insight be able to identify that object if it's at the end of the page?
I would need to research that. I don't know the answer offhand, but we'll take that back and answer that question for you. I believe it will, though. I just want to make sure we give you the right answer.
Okay, great, great. And just to let everybody know real quick, because I'm getting a number of questions on in regard to a copy of the demonstration. We are recording the demo. We will also be more than happy to provide a PDF version of the slides. And then also, if you and your organization would like a personal demo, give us a call, contact us, send me an email, and we'll be glad to arrange that. It might take a week or two to make that happen, as we've been very busy, I'm happy to say. And it's just based on availability of our senior engineers such as Patrick. But another question for you, Patrick. How much ability is there for custom development? For example, in our current tools, we have classes containing methods we have built for certain types of interactions or detailed verifications that can be called by any of our test scripts.
Mm-hmm. So if anything, we've actually just expanded that. So that capability has always existed, especially within Quick Test Professional, to create your own custom classes and make really advanced automation through leveraging all the different components that you could create through Quick Test. Now with this improved IDE, that functionality has only been expanded. So you can create your own custom verifications. You can even write custom modules, the DLLs that you reference if you need to. And that's one of the advantages, actually, of using VBScript, is because the way that VBScript interacts with the OS, you can really instantiate any sort of object you'd like and use that object, whether that's an Excel object where you can interface with the API for Excel, or it might be an API from another application. So if anything, the capabilities have only been expanded in that regard.
All right, fantastic. Another question for you. I see that the external update order test has a service test icon. Does that mean you can call regular service test or quick test pro test from UFT?
Yep. So and actually, the icon really just represents a API test, which previously was a service test. So it's just basically a different naming convention. But you can actually, from a GUI-based test, you can call a API test, or what was traditionally known as a service test, or you can flip it around, and from a service test, or what is now an API test, you can call a GUI component. So you can start on one side and pull one of the other ones. The only thing you cannot do, though, is let's say I have a GUI test, and I call an API test. If that API test also calls a GUI test, that's going to cause it to break. So you can't kind of weave your way inside and out. You have to have one test that maintains kind of control of the entire flow.
Fantastic. Another question on, had a couple of questions on insight objects, so I'm going to combine them. Are they dependent upon screen resolution, and if an object changes the location on that screen or on that page, will there be any challenges when executing the script?
So it's not based on screen resolution because it's looking at the bitmap. So the bitmap is always a relative to the screen resolution. Now, if that bitmap changed, or if the object changed, so it looks different, then you would potentially run into problems with object identification. But if the object moves, because it's not based on coordinates, it's based on just looking at a bitmap and trying to find where it is on your screen, it's going to be able to identify it. So let's say you move it from the left side of the screen to the right, it's still going to identify that in your application.
Okay, great. And Patrick, would you happen to know, are there any significant differences in the execution performance with UFT 11.5 versus QuickTest Pro 11?
There should not be any differences between them. They should be, 11.5 should be as fast as the previous versions. Now, that being said, it's actually going to be a little bit better when you're integrating API tests into your GUI tests. So in version 11, you were able to reference service test calls in your QuickTest Professional test. They've kind of redesigned the way that works so it's a bit quicker. Everything gets loaded right at the front. So if you have long tests, it may take a second for it to kick off, but the execution should be very fast.
Okay, great. Another question that I've actually gotten a few on, which is the same thing. If there are several objects, let's say links, icons, whatever it might be, and they're named the same, or even if they look the same on a page, can it tell them apart, and how would it do that?
Yes, so let's say that you have 3 links that are identical on the page, and you were using Insight to interface with those links. It's still going to keep track of the ordinal identifier, so that's basically the order that they appear in the application. So it's going to number them, 1 through whatever, and you can interface with them using that. Now, you can also use the visual relation identifier, which is basically saying, I know what another object looks like, and I can positively identify another object. So where is the object that I don't know about in relation to the object that I do know about? So it's kind of similar to finding a landmark and then finding where you are on a map. It's very much the same technology. So in that scenario, Insight would be able to identify each of those links, even though they look identical to us.
Fantastic. And now for the last question. Can UFT validate a Flash movie?
It's going to depend on if the Flash movie is based in Flex. So if it was built out of Flex, then you're going to be able to interface with it. Now, things like movie content would be somewhat difficult. There may be some ways we could work on it, but that being said, because it's very much dynamic content, it would be probably difficult to do. You could be verifying that the movie is playing or that certain controls in that movie player are working correctly. It may still be challenging to verify the content itself, though, unless you have some sort of content flag that you could use. And the advantage is because of the way that Flex is built, it may be something that you could embed in the application that then we could actually pull as a property of it. So if you wanted to see that a certain movie ID was playing, as long as you could embed that in your application, because of the way the Flex technology works, you'd be able to pull that as a property of the object. So while you wouldn't be able to necessarily verify you were watching Braveheart and not Die Hard, you might know that it was ID 5 versus ID 12.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Patrick, thank you very much. Great job, sir. We are getting ready to end the audio portion of today's webinar. I'm going to keep it open, though, so that if any of you would like to submit questions, we'll be more than happy to answer those when we take the question log and put some answers to it. I hope everybody just has an excellent day. And again, great job to Patrick McCartney. And thank you for joining us, everybody. Bye now.